Most people don't know what's holding them back, but you do because you listen to me, Sam, your self-care guru and journal junkie. Welcome to Journal Entries, your safe place where you can tune in weekly to get tips, tricks, and journal prompts to uncover your feelings, gain clarity, and make your move. Hello, welcome to this week's journal entry where I am giving you the skinny, the tea, the juicy details on all of the things that happened during my fertility treatments with egg freezing. I'm going to share why I did it in the first place, my full experience with, oh my gosh, the shots that I had to give myself, the symptoms. Also, there were symptoms that I definitely think were from my pregnant twin sister that I was feeling because my hormones were just like on a whole other level. And also, I asked on social media if you had any questions that I could answer. So I'll get to those at the end. Why did I freeze my eggs? I decided to freeze my eggs because I would like the option to have kids in the future. And at this point in my life, I'm not dating. It's just not a priority for me right now. I would love to be in a partnership someday, but at right now, it's too much on me mentally and physically. And I am also 35 years old, and they say that 35 is like the number where like the quality of your eggs and the number of your eggs start decreasing. Now, the first thing that you do when you want to go through this process, at least in the way that I did it, was you schedule a consultation. And I told that reason to the nurse, just my age and that I would like to have the option for kids in the future. And she said that she hates that the year 35 gets such a bad rap because like it's not actually 35. You do have a couple years afterwards that, your eggs are still good quality and everybody is different based on our health and, tons of different factors. But she was like, it's okay if you like wait a couple years. But I knew that I just wanted to rip off the Band-Aid and go through with it. So that was a little bit, or that is the reason that I went through with this experience. And I was supposed to actually start it in January and it got pushed back. So I went in for my appointment and then all of the medications were supposed to be delivered to my house. They don't go through it like your pharmacy, they get delivered right to your house. And it was a snowstorm here in Western New York. And the one medicine that you need, I think I was on two shots on day one. And there's one that you like really, really need. And the other one is like, if it doesn't arrive in time, that's okay. The one that you really, really need, that is the one that was stuck in the snowstorm. So I like amped myself up and prepared myself to start in January with my day one. No, what is it? Is it day one of my cycle? Day one of your cycle, you call the center that you're working with, and then you usually start at like day 2 or day 3. And so that was an emotional roller coaster because I did so much prep work of like, okay, I'm going to have to be giving myself these shots. And also, that was the same week that Griffin woke up with a severe ear infection. It was more than an ear infection. I forgot what they actually called it at urgent care. But yeah, so I was fine that it didn't happen that week. It was just a lot going on. And so then it got bumped to the next month because you have to start, like I just said, on like the very beginning of your cycle. And if you miss it, you got to wait until the next round. So I started in February and I had 2 shots at night throughout the whole time. And then on day 3, I started a morning shot. So I had 3 shots a day for the majority of it. And the whole process, they say it's between 8 to 14 days. And I think mine was 9 days of shots in this medicine because I think I was also taking a pill. And then you wait 36 hours before going into surgery. So I think my total was 12 days. The symptoms that I felt were Not too bad, honestly. The worst part, I think, was the overthinking, the nerves, the anxiety. I have never given myself a shot before, and that was just so foreign to me to think of like stabbing myself, is what it felt like willingly poking myself. And it's not, I'm fine with needles, but I always look away. Like when they take my blood at the doctor's office or if I'm ever getting a shot for anything, it's just like get it over with, but I'm not looking. I'm not like into the process. So that was really, really hard for me just to wrap my head around the fact that I would need to do this to myself and that I didn't have anybody here to do it with me. Like I know that a lot of people do this with a partner, and the partner is the one that gives the shots. I don't know if that would have been better or worse. Like it was kind of nice being in control. But it was just a thought that I had of like, if somebody was here, would they? I don't know, so much to think about. One question I did get was, where on the body do you do the shots? And the nurses that I was working with told me to do it around the belly, the lower half of your belly. So between your waist and like, I don't know, is your waist? Yeah, between your waist and your hips, but in the belly region. And then I was Googling one night when it was closer to the end because I just felt like my stomach area was so sensitive. I was like, can you do this in any other area? And I did see that you could do it in your thigh. I did not. I was just a little bit too nervous, so I just kept doing it in my stomach. I also had a lot of anxiety around bedtime because, again, I was doing this on my own, meaning I'm the only person at night to get my son ready for bed. And so the whole idea of doing my normal bedtime routine with my son, which is, bath time, and then we put on our PJs, and then we read books, and then we um, attempt to get him to go to sleep. And that goes on. It really varies from like an hour to 3 hours every night is what it usually takes. And so in my mind, dealing with that and having to work up the mental courage to give myself these shots at night put me in like overdrive of anxiety. But I decided to do my shots when he was in the bath. It was a little bit earlier in the night than they recommend to do the shots, but I knew that that was the one time where I could like leave Griffin for a few minutes where it would be better doing it that way for me than like leaving him in his room and him screaming the whole time and then I like have that in my ear. So that's when I decided to do it, which helped me because I had like a specific time, it was calm and it seemed to flow really well. And then the first symptoms that I got was just lower cramping. Also, upper cramping, which I'll talk about in a second. I did feel a little bit of nausea in the mornings, and you are pumping yourself with hormones, right? And so you get a little bit more hormonal. The only hormonal aspect that I felt was feeling short with people. Like I just was not tolerating much from people in general, and also Griffin. I was felt like I was being very firm with what I expected at bedtime, and it actually was great. I feel like I need to be that way more often, um, because bedtimes that week went so smooth. Like I think it took him 30 minutes on average to go to bed each night, like once we were done with books and whatnot, which is really fast for him. And so I actually really liked that that side effect. Also, I was at high risk for over hyperstimulation syndrome, OHSS. And that is when you are already stimulating your ovaries for this whole process. That's literally what you're doing. But some people get this OHSS, which is where your ovaries overstimulate, and it's not good. It's where fluid leaks out of the ovaries and into other parts of your body. And it can be 1% of people get it severe. And then I think I read 25 to 33% get mild OHSS. And so they knew this about me before I even started the medications because I did blood work. And I think it was my AMH. I think that's what it was. That number on my blood work panel came back. that number based on your age, there's a chart, and that put me at high risk for it. So I was on medication before all of this even happened that was supposed to help that and improve the quality of my eggs at the same time. The worst symptom, the only like negative experience that I have from this was the evening trigger shot. So the trigger shot is what you do before you go in for surgery. And since I was high risk for overstimulation, they didn't have me do one of them. I think you were supposed to do two or whatever. And they lowered my dosage for the HCG, but they gave me a lower amount. And they gave me something called cabergoline, which is a pill that you can take for OHSS. And it's supposed to help with the symptoms, which mostly happen after the surgery. So you start taking that the night of the trigger, and then 12 hours later, you do the morning trigger shot based on the timing of your surgery, this is. So mine was evening and morning. So that night, I took my trigger shot. I think it was a Thursday night. I did that and I took the cabergoline, and it was a large amount of serum to go into my stomach, which at this point, the last day, your ovaries are so big, and I don't feel like I looked very bloated, but I felt bloated, and it was a different kind of bloat. It wasn't like the bloat that you experience when you just eat a really big meal. It was truly like natural bloat, if that makes sense. It felt different, but it just felt like I had no more skin to squeeze. Like you squeeze your skin and then you poke yourself. And when you're so bloated, it's just like my skin was just like full. Like there was nothing to squeeze. So that was really hard. But anyways, I did it. And then I started reading a book at night, and literally exactly 30 minutes later, the words started shaking off of the page. And I was like, this feels weird. Like maybe I should just go to bed. But then, like a second later, the whole room started spinning. And then I think I just started to panic because my biggest fear this whole time was doing this alone. And like, if anything did happen, it's just me and my son at home. So, like, if anything happened to me, who's going to take care of my son? And like, that was my biggest thing that I was afraid of. And so when this started happening, luckily, Griffin was already fast asleep, but I started to panic. Like, I truly felt like I was going to faint or need to go to the hospital or emergency room, something. And so I texted Gretchen, my twin sister, first. And I was like, I don't feel good. Like, I think something's wrong. And then this all probably happened in like 60 seconds. Then I texted my mom. I was like, I'm hot. I'm overheating. I have a headache. And then I was like, I don't feel good. This isn't right. And then I called my mom and I was like, can you come over? I don't feel good, crying. But then I was like, crap, the door is locked. And so I get out of bed, and I literally, everything is shaking and spinning around me so bad that I am like holding on to the walls and like taking as big of steps as I possibly can, because that means it's fewer steps to the door. I like reach as far as I can, unlock it, and then again take like four massive steps. My bedroom is really close to the door. Massive steps to get back into bed, and then I just like laid down. It was so bad. And then my mom came over, and then I asked her to sleep over. She slept in my king bed with me just because I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. I was so afraid of like needing to go somewhere. And then I had my twin sister on call who is 9 months pregnant. I was like, you might need to come over and watch Griffin as mom brings me to the hospital. Anyways, turns out that dizziness is a symptom of the trigger shot. And with cabergoline, that extra medicine that I took, vertigo is also something. So I think that I just got it so bad because I did both of those. But it was so awful that the next morning I called the nurses and I was like, this is what happened. And they said that it was highly unusual and not to do the morning trigger shot. So I was so grateful. I don't even think I would have done the trigger shot if they told me to do it. So I luckily did not have to do it. I was like all done with my shots and it felt so good just to be like done and over. But that night, I'm just remembering this now, that night that everything in the world was spinning for me, as my mom was in my bed with me, I heard Griffin. Griffin woke up in the middle of the night. And so I went into his room and he had ear pain. And I was like, this is not happening. I like am about to throw up. I'm so nauseous. And he's like needing me to be there. And it turned out that he had an ear infection again, just like the prior month. Um, but I was just like, I can't do this. And so I actually slept with him in bed, which I never try and do for many reasons, but that's not the episode for this. And so I just slept in bed with him until like 4:30 and then I got out of bed. Anyway, so that's the whole symptoms. But there were symptoms that I believe I was channeling from my 9-month pregnant twin sister. The first was upper cramps. So before even feeling lower cramps, I felt cramps like underneath my ribs. And apparently that's unheard of, but it was this exact same cramps that I remember feeling when I was in labor, like having contractions. I felt them up top. And I think I was just on hormone overdrive, as was my twin sister. And we already feel each other's, like what we're going through, especially if it's something like dramatic. Like when we used to play soccer, if she got the wind knocked out of her, I would also feel that, not to the same degree, but like I would feel it and vice versa. And so that's kind of what this was. So upper cramping. Also, I felt hip joint pain, which is not a symptom of that a typical person would have from these shots, but I felt like hip joint pain, like it was a little bit hard to walk. Also, the last day or two that I was doing the stimulating shots, I had the urge to spread my legs when like bending down as if I had a big belly in the way, just like without even thinking the way that I would squat. And I was also like waddling. Like I just felt like I had a pregnant belly, which was the weirdest thing because I'd look down and it's like, clearly I don't. But like I think my ovaries were so big that it was like kind of, it felt like it was pushing my legs out. And I just truly felt super pregnant. It was wild. It was so crazy. So those are the symptoms that I think I was channeling from my twin sister. What helped the most? Two things. And I learned this first one because there were a few nights where I did feel really bloated, which made it extra hard to give myself the shots. And I searched Google for like how to help this. One is, well, I came up with this first one. It's exhaling when you give yourself the shots. This is for if anybody is going to be going through this. I would take a deep breath in and then I would poke myself and then exhale as I was like injecting the medicine into me. That seemed to help. But then I wish that I got this tip sooner. I was using an ice cube on the spot that I would like pinch around to see where it felt comfortable to give myself the shot. And I would put an ice cube on it for only like 10 seconds. And then I would give myself the shot. And then immediately afterwards, I would put an ice pack on it. And with that approach, I like barely felt the shots. So that is something that I wish I did from the beginning, but definitely helped towards the end. Okay, so now it's the surgery day. My twin sister drove me up and I went through CNY fertility. It stands for Central New York Fertility, but they have facilities in like Colorado, in a few different states. I think Florida, maybe. Um, but I was going to the Rochester clinic for my blood work and ultrasound, but the Buffalo clinic and Syracuse clinics are the ones that actually do the procedure, the egg retrieval. So I went to Buffalo and it was so nice. That facility, it's like a spa setup. So, if you've ever had surgery, at a hospital, you put on this like paper thin gown and you're just like uncomfortable, right? Here, they give you a robe, like a spa robe to wear. I did have to wear a hairnet. And then like socks, regular hospital socks I had to wear. But it was just very like comforting. And then they told me the number of eggs that they were told they were going to retrieve. And they told me it was, I think they said 9 on one ovary and 2 eggs on the other ovary. And I was like, I don't know. When I was going in for my ultrasound, they told me that I had, I think it was 16 follicles on one ovary and 6 or 8 follicles on the other. And so I was like, I think it's going to be a little bit more than that. But overall surgery in the US, you can get put under. Is that like sedated? And so I didn't feel anything. After sharing my experience, I learned that my Canadian friends don't get put under. They just get like pain medicine and they can feel the whole thing, which I can't even imagine. Luckily, I was put under, literally couldn't feel anything. I just remember waking, oh, I remember going to sleep. Um, the doctor was like, okay, I'm putting in the anesthesia now. You'll start to taste something a little funny and maybe you might smell it. And I was like, oh, yep, there it is. It tastes like my old inhaler. I had not asthma, pneumonia once that I needed an inhaler for. And that's like what it tasted like. And then that was the last thing I remember. I remember waking up and the anesthesiologist was like, do you have any cramping? Because he was going to give me either pain medicine or just like Tylenol or something. And then he left the room. And I just remember the first thing that I said was, that was so nice. It just felt like such a deep sleep. And I just woke up from the best nap. I was like, can you just do that again? It was truly just so relaxing. I just have not felt that relaxed in a while. And I just remember thanking the anesthesiologist profusely. I was like, thank you so much. Thank you. I so appreciate you. Anyways, so that's pretty much it. Then I went home and they were able to tell me that they got 25 eggs. The next day they called and they said of the 25, there were 17 that were mature enough to freeze. There's actually 15 on that day. And then the next morning, apparently 2 of them matured. The other ones that didn't either were over mature, and so they couldn't use those, or they weren't mature enough. And so I have 17 eggs that are currently being frozen. I will say that the recovery was something that I didn't expect. I thought that the hardest part was going to be those shots and just any symptoms that I might feel that week of giving myself the shots. But the recovery was way more sensitive than I expected. I do think I had over hyperstimulation syndrome. And what they say to do for that is just bed rest during treatment and after the pill that I was on, which is called metformin. And just that you'd feel like a lot of cramping and a lot of bloating afterwards. And I definitely was. My whole stomach was just like very bloated and sensitive. And they say that the best cure for it is a high protein and high salt diet. So just constantly not having water because that can make it worse, but having like liquid IV, or I like to have hydrate from body, any like electrolyte drink, Gatorade, and then high protein. So I was doing that. And then I had mentioned the cabergoline pill earlier. I did not take that again. I was like, nothing would make me take that again. I will suffer through this than going through that vertigo. Or I don't even know what it was. We'll just call it vertigo. So I just felt like I was very bloated. I felt like I was going to explode like a balloon. But on day 3, I remember feeling some relief, like less pain and less bloat. And day 4 was a Friday, and that was when I felt mostly back to normal. Parenting during recovery was tough because I couldn't pick up Griffin nearly as much as I normally do. And even things like Griffin, my son, never wants to get out of the bathtub at night. And so I often have to go in and pull him out of the bathtub. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't lift anything heavy because there's something called ovary torsion, I think, which is where your ovaries literally flip. And apparently it's very painful and you need to go to the hospital for that. So I was like, I'm not going to work out. I'm not going to do anything that might cause that, especially since my ovaries in particular were so big. And so at bath time, I just explained to him that I had to go to the doctor for my stomach and that I had surgery and that I was recovering. And that same day that I had my procedure done, Griffin, like I mentioned, had an ear infection. My mom was the one to take him to his doctor's appointment. Turns out he had a double ear infection and a slight fever. So he came home from school that day. So I had to recover while parenting him. And since he also went to the doctor that day, I think it made a little bit more sense to him. I was like, I also went to the doctor but I had like a procedure done on my stomach. So I need you to step out of the bathtub right now. And it took a few times saying that, but he stepped out of the bathtub. Like I didn't have to pick him up. And it's funny because now when I say, okay, Griffin, it's time to get out of the bath, are you going to step out of the tub or are you going to let me pick you up or have me pick you up? Which I've always said that even before, this experience. But now he says, do you have a stomach ache or do you have a headache? And if I say yes, he will step out. If I say no, he'll make me go in and go get him and usually fight a Ninja Turtle on the way there. So it's just interesting. But yeah, so that was post-surgery at day 4. I felt mostly back to normal. But today, at the time of this recording, was the first day that I exercised after that whole thing. I didn't work out while I was giving myself the shots or afterwards. And I felt so good in my body before. I've been doing the body program called Dig Deeper. It's a lifting program, like no high impact, no jumping at all. So it's heavy lifting. And I just felt so strong and lean and toned. And so I'm really excited to get back to this program. My body is loving it. So back at it today, and it felt really good. A couple other questions that came in. One is about the cost and if insurance covers it. So some insurance companies cover it, and it's really based off of need. So I contacted my insurance company, and they said that if you are 35 years old and you've been trying to get pregnant for at least 6 months unsuccessfully, some of like the blood work or some of the cost can be covered, or maybe it's some of the medications can be covered, but not all of it. But if you have like cancer or you have an upcoming surgery that will impact your fertility, your insurance might cover something like that. So it's really based on the individual. I did pay out of pocket. Egg freezing can cost up to $30,000. The average cost is around 11,000. I would say 8,000 to 15,000 per cycle. I did some research, and that seemed to be the standard, between 8,000 and 15 per cycle. And what that means is I went through one cycle. So one cycle of giving myself the shots, one procedure. A lot of times people do it multiple times because they just want more chances for more eggs to come. I should have looked up. Let me look up quickly. What is the average number of eggs collected during egg retrieval? Okay, on the spot, let's see. Younger women tend to have more eggs retrieved than older women. For example, women under 35 retrieve 5 to 14 eggs, while women 38 and older retrieve 10 to 34 eggs. It just said younger women have more eggs. Yet women under 35 have, okay, that doesn't make sense to me. 10 to 12. Another Google response. As a rule of thumb, having 10 to 12 mature eggs after egg retrieval is a good number of eggs and will give a woman a good chance of having at least one embryo, which gives a woman a 65% chance of pregnancy. So that's the other thing that I didn't realize before all of this, is that not all of the eggs that you freeze will thaw. I think I read that there is 50 to 80% chance of survival. Or is that? Yeah, a thaw rate. So even if 50% survive, I would have 8 eggs. But then of those, not all of the eggs successfully become an embryo, which I didn't realize that. I thought all of them became an embryo. And then from there, it might not be a quality embryo. It might not be one that can be placed inside of you and become a baby. So there's so many, it's so cool that our bodies can do this, but there's so much science behind it. Anyways, back to the cost. That's why a lot of people do more than one cycle. I personally paid 6,000. So I paid less than all of the numbers that I found when I was doing the research for this, but it does vary based on the treatments that you need throughout. Um, Storage fees are included for my first year, but for the average storage fee is anywhere from $500 to $1,000 annually. Mine is $600 annually. So starting next year, I would have to pay $600 annually. So typically it's out of pocket unless you do have like some qualifying, you know, like disease or treatment that you're going to be going through or anything that can impact your fertility. Also, if you go through CNY Fertility, or I'm sure other places too, they do offer grants where you can apply for a discounted rate or even to get it for free. Another question, along with the egg freezing, somebody asked, where are the eggs kept? With CNY Fertility, they're kept at their facility. And I feel like this is a good time to bring awareness to what's happening in Alabama. I don't know all of the like specific details, but facilities in Alabama are facing issues because there was a law that was passed where they are now considering embryos, so not just an egg, but embryos, a person rather than property. So they used to just be considered property, but now it's considered a person. So if you don't end up using your embryos, which happens for lots of reasons, some it's financial. People just can't keep paying the annual fee, and so they decide to not use them. Or they just decide they don't need them anymore due to age or whatever. And when you don't need them, normally they're donated to science for research or they're just discarded. But now that in Alabama, since they are considered a person, not using an embryo and donating them or discarding them is considered murder. So fertility centers in that state are closing, and women either don't have the option anymore to do that, or they have to travel out of state. And I was talking to the anesthesiologist before he put me under, and he was saying that CNY fertility is obviously very focused on what's happening in the world right now with this, and they want to open up centers in the bordering states. Hopefully this doesn't become a national law, a federal law. That would be insane. But they want to open up facilities on the border states of on the places that are putting this law in place, just so that they can support all of those people that can no longer go to their state for this sort of support. So I feel like I decided to do this completely on my own, just for the hope that maybe someday I'll have kids again. But for people that are choosing to do this because they won't be able to get pregnant after undergoing treatments or some surgeries or whatever, those are the people that, like, they truly, if they live in Alabama or it becomes a federal law, they just will not be able to have this as an option. And everybody who already has embryos is at stake too. And so it's a newer law. They don't know like what will happen yet. I don't think of if anyone will press charges or who they're going to press charges against. Will it be the facility? Will it be the individual? But it's just craziness going on right now. So there's a lot there. Do they do genetic testing? That was another question. Yes, they can test the eggs. I decided not to do that because I know that one of the reasons that I also wanted to do this that I haven't mentioned is I'm a carrier of hemophilia. And when hemophilia can be passed down, and if you have a daughter, they can be a carrier or not, but they can't actually have hemophilia. So I am a carrier of hemophilia passed down from my mom, passed down from her dad, my grandpa. but hemophilia is passed down to sons, and it's a 50-50 chance that they will have it or not. Luckily, Griffin does not have it. So that is a miracle. But if I were to have another boy, he 50-50 chance will either have it or not have it. And the hemophilia carrier that I am, it's the most severe kind. And so a lot goes into that. And so I know that I'm going to want to do genetic testing, at least to test for that. And so I opted not to test my eggs, which I could test if they are carrying the hemophilia gene. But I just know that I'm going to want to do the testing when they become embryos, if and when they become embryos. So I decided to wait on that. The last question that I wanted to answer is advice. Do I have any advice for somebody who's going to go through this? And I have two pieces of advice. One is if it's on your heart and if you've been thinking about it, do it. It's out of the norm and it's out of your routine and it's scary and unpredictable, but it is empowering knowing that it is your choice and that you're doing this to secure, hopefully, your future. So I do think that I would recommend it. Would I do it again? Not sure, but I'm glad that I did go through with it this time. And my other best advice that I can give is to journal throughout it. Earlier I said there's two things that helped, and I never circled back to the second, which is journaling. If you have a lot of nerves throughout the process and anxiety, which I did, journaling helped me so much. And I'm going to give you the exact way that I journaled that helped me the most. So I like to journal about the worst case and best case scenario. And this was so interesting because I know this type of journaling that I do. And before I even had a chance to journal on it, in my head, I made up the worst case scenario was that I would give myself the shots and they would hurt too much, or I wouldn't be able to poke myself and I would just not be able to follow through with it. And I would give up and miss out on this opportunity and miss out on the financial investment that I was paid for and just miss out on this whole thing. And that just was not an option for me. When I commit to something, I'm going to follow through on it. So knowing that that was my worst case scenario and that there wasn't, it knowing that there was no solution for it, it's just like, oh, well, I've got to do it. It just made me feel stuck and like not in control, even though this is all my decision and I was in full control the whole time. Picturing that as my worst case scenario made me feel like I almost had to do it. Like, great job, Sam. You got yourself in this situation. Like, now you got to follow through almost, which did not feel good. And it wasn't until I think 3 days into the treatments where I was like, you know what? I'm going to write out a different worst case scenario. I'm going to think of something different. And so the worst case scenario that I wrote out was that I do go through with the shots and I go in for the egg retrieval and something goes wrong where I need to be hospital. Maybe I need to be transported to a hospital and um I need to be there for a few days and then nobody is here to care for my son. And I just kind of played out the whole scenario. And then what I do after writing out the worst case scenario is think of the worst case solution. So if that were to happen, what would I do? And I just kind of wrote out like my mom and my sister and my aunt and my dad, like, and I even my friends who I also have been through this process. I've been talking to them the whole time too for support. And I was like, maybe they could even help with Griffin because their son goes to daycare with him. I was like, I have a support system. I know that people would step in for this. And so you do the worst case scenario and then worst case solution. And then here's the key. You let it go. You feel confident that if it happens, you have a plan. And then end with the best case scenario. Best case, I wrote, was that I go through the whole shots, that my symptoms aren't too bad. I go through the retrieval and it goes super smooth. I get tons of eggs. They're all able to be frozen. I come home. I don't have over hyperstimulation syndrome, and I'm just ready to get back to work the next day and good to go. And I just kept playing that on repeat. Like everything is going to go smooth. Everything is going to go fine. If it doesn't, I've got a plan. But like I'm choosing to focus on this positive. And just that different worst case scenario, which sounds funny to like be entertaining a worst case scenario so much, especially if you're like me and you like in the past, I used to hide from the worst case. I used to just like shove it on the rug and like close my ears and close my eyes and pretend like it wasn't happening. But like acknowledging it and honoring it and coming up with that solution and then releasing it truly is just like a weight off of my shoulders. And writing about it in that way, choosing a different worst case scenario, gave me more control. It gave me more agency and power in this situation where I was like, okay, I can handle this. I can do it. So that journaling in general, I journaled almost every day. And it did help because I remember the first night that I gave myself the shots, I journaled and I was like, I feel like I need to emotionally eat. If you know my story, I dealt with binge eating disorder in the past. And I was like, I just feel like I had gotten Pop-Tarts a few days before and I hadn't even opened them. But I remembered that I had them and I was like, oh my gosh, Pop-Tarts used to be a binge food for me. And so I had the Pop-Tarts and I was like, I feel like I just need to eat them all. Like I have so many emotions. And I ended up having 2 packs, so 4 Pop-Tarts, but then I stopped and it didn't feel like emotional eating, like the intention wasn't there. But that feeling did come back. And so I journaled through that. And so it definitely was helpful to just dump whatever was on my mind on paper each day because each day was so different. So journaling was definitely helpful. That was the long story of my fertility process. It was a process. It was an experience. I'm glad that I did it. And I am so grateful for you guys because I was sharing the steps along the way and showing up in my social media about it and whatnot. And I received so much support and love and positive words from you that meant more than you know, especially on the rough nights. I went back and I like reread your guys' messages. So I lastly just wanted to say thank you for your support. Thank you for tuning into this and being here for me as much as I try and show up for you. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's journal entry. I love connecting with my listeners, so make sure you screenshot this episode and tag me on Instagram at samantha.s.says so I know you're listening. And don't forget to grab your free training and journal prompts at www.samanthapenkoff.com/podcast.